Governor Cuomo said that he has never propositioned anybody. Do you believe that he was propositioning you?
Yes.
For what?
Sex.
And to be clear, what made you think that he was trying to sleep with you?
Without explicitly saying it, he implied to me that I was old enough for him and he was lonely.
People will watch this and say, why didn't you get up and leave?
It didn't feel like I had a choice.
He's your boss.
He's my boss. He's everyone's boss.
That's Cuomo accuser Charlotte Bennett speaking out for the first time since she made her allegations against Governor Cuomo. Now, just 24 hours earlier, Governor Cuomo addressed the harassment allegations during an emotional press conference, but he didn't mention any names.
I now understand that I acted in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. It was unintentional, and I truly and deeply apologize for it. I feel awful about it, and frankly, I am embarrassed by it. And that's not easy to say, but that's the truth.
This comes, of course, as we're getting new details about scandal number 2, the nursing homes. Wall Street Journal and the New York Times reporting the top Cuomo aides told state health officials to intentionally remove the number of nursing home deaths from a public report. It is worth noting that Cuomo says that information was deleted out of concern that the Trump administration would use it as a political cudgel to go after the state of New York. Now, as we speak, federal prosecutors are investigating the Cuomo administration's handling of the nursing homes, and the state attorney general is probing the abuse allegations. But despite the fire hose of bad news out of Albany, people, well, if you believe the polls, they're still evenly split on how they feel about their governor. His approval rating sitting at 45%, but bear in mind, it did hit 70% last year. Also, the majority of people don't want him to quit, but they also don't really want him to run for a 4th term either. And now state lawmakers today voted to strip Cuomo of his emergency powers to deal with COVID. Again, both the Senate and the Assembly have Democratic majorities. Joining us now is a Democrat who used to serve in the state Senate, David Carlucci. David, how you been?
I've been great. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
You as well, and you're certainly doing better than the governor right now. Is it surreal, given where the governor was less than a year ago, even just months ago, in terms of not just the state, but in a national standing? I remember people who were trying to figure out ways to draft and be the Democratic nominee for president late in the process, but also the vice-like grip he had on New York politics for so long to see him so vulnerable.
I think one thing is certain here, that we are going to see real change from these scandals. That I think it'll be some long-term changes. And as you covered earlier today, you talked about how the Attorney General will be doing an investigation. However, that only came about after real outcry, because people finally realized that the only way you can investigate a governor is with the governor's approval to do that. And the governor submitted a waiver to allow for the Attorney General to conduct an investigation. This is something that has to change. I know my former colleagues in the Senate have drafted legislation to change that process and really give the Attorney General some more power when it comes to investigating the governor and other entities in New York State.
You know, David, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is you know how Albany works, but also as not being a sitting lawmaker right now, you don't have some of the baggage that a lot of other folks do. It is no secret that if you worked in Albany on either side of the aisle and in either chamber, there was a fear factor of Cuomo. You crossed him at your own political peril. Listen, I even got an angry phone call from him at a time here. So we all know what it's like to be on the other end of the call. That said, do you think people are still afraid to cross him because they don't know how this ends, or is the fear factor of Cuomo no more?
Well, it's a good question. Now, I was saying earlier, I was actually presenting at a conference last week and talking about the governor and how in New York State, the Constitution gives the governor tremendous power. But on top of that, Andrew Cuomo knows how to activate every level of power available to him. From studying as a young man when he worked for his father, the governor, he's really been a student of government, of power, and he knows how to execute every lever. But with that said, I think this has exposed a new opportunity for lawmakers to really push back. And as you saw earlier with Assemblyman Kim coming forward and talking about an aggressive phone conversation that he had with the governor, another thing to keep in mind is that the legislature does have a veto-proof majority with a sense of support from the public that if they are to pass these reforms and the governor were to veto them, I believe that they have the ability to override them, and they would have the support of the public as well.
It's interesting, David, because there is, and you know where I'm going with this, I can count on one hand the people who are going to decide if Cuomo survives or not. Obviously, Tish James, who's going to be running the probe, but also Andrea Stewart-Cousins. Right now, she said, let's wait to see the findings of this. But I think if either break and say Cuomo's got to go, I don't think he can survive. And to that, there is a lot of political ambitions in New York, but not a lot of dance chairs, and a lot of people want to sit in them. I don't think Gillibrand or Schumer are going away anytime soon, and that leaves on the statewide level obviously the plum job being governor, and he's up again next year. The political motivations, and don't be PC with me, tell me, come on now. It's got to be running through people's minds. Tish James has got an opportunity potentially to be the Democratic nominee for governor if she wants it. I can make the argument about a few other people here. That's got to factor into the calculations if and when they decide to say that Cuomo's got to go.
Absolutely. I mean, my theory in running for office is if you're a current elected official, that the best way to campaign is to do your job as well as possible. And now Tish James, it's definitely got to be on her mind, but she's in such a position now that she has to execute with integrity and really be have the faith that she's doing the right thing and not using it for political motives, of course. And her just doing that, I think, would put her in an amazing position to be the next governor. With that said, I think there's probably many politicians in New York that would love that position. It's a tremendous position and one that you can do so much good or bad if you're not doing it right. So I think there's many people that will think about this. But yeah, you'll see, I think, over the next coming weeks, a whole bunch of politicians on both sides of the aisle that will start to position themselves to be the nominee of their party in 2022.
I might have the minority position on this one in terms of his handling of the nursing home scandal. I think the biggest mistake that the governor made was that he's given me three different versions of an answer. One is, listen, I had to do what I had to do because I was afraid the Trump administration was going to penalize New York here because they were looking to get us. Two, I didn't do anything wrong. I was upfront about it, and I got people trying to make political hay because they're doing convenient accounting. And then the other one is, well, yes, maybe we weren't as transparent as we could. We didn't change the actual number of deaths. We just had them in the wrong bucket. As I believe, and correct me, David, if they just said one of those versions and they just stuck with it, at the end of the day, yeah, they were maybe more than a little cute here in how they did the story, but it's not that they hid the total deaths. It's where they died. And again, I'm not trying to be callous, but I think the optics or the messaging has been a bigger problem than even the action itself.
Right. And you know this, you've covered it over and over again where, the cover up is worse than the crime. And yes, it is a damaging number. It's a startling number, the deaths that we've seen. But you're right. It's the faith, it's the trust, it's the integrity. And when that starts to erode, that's where the real problem comes. And I think that's where we're having this difficulty. And where you have the nursing homes, you have the treatment that's coming to light of the way the governor interacts with the legislature and other colleagues. And then you have the sexual harassment. So it's just piling on top of each other. And I think the public starts to, not know the details of each accusation, but it just piles on and the public gets confused and kind of wants to, distance themselves from from that situation.
Listen, you know, I know more than a year and a half in politics is about 5 lifetimes. So before the election, correct me. I say if there's not more revelations, if there's not more assault claims and legitimate ones that come forward, I think he survives. Would you take the opposite position if you and I had to lay down a marker here? Do you think he makes it, or do you think he doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, working closely with the governor over the past decade, he's probably the smartest person in politics, masterful. So if anyone was going to outlive some of these controversies, it would be Governor Cuomo. You know, I wouldn't bet against him, certainly, after working with him all these years. It's a rough, a couple of months ahead. Remember, right now is the midst of the budget negotiations and makes things it's always tense, but this adds another level of intensity to those negotiations. So yes, another part that we'll have to see is, what does this investigation that the Attorney General is leading, what does that tell us? But I would give it to you and kind of agree that, as the governor said, he refuses to resign. This is someone that knows the ins and outs of New York State government better than anyone else. So I wouldn't put it past that, again, depending on what this investigation says, that he survives and makes it through the term. But as you saw in the polling, a 4th term for any governor is very difficult, but particularly given the circumstances, it makes those prospects, bleaker and bleaker.
David Carlucci, Senator, as always, it's good catching up. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
You too. All right, folks, we come back. Instead of trying to encourage more people to vote, Republicans doing everything they can to reduce the number of people who can cast their ballots. After the break, I'm going to show you how that's happening on the state level and also in the highest court in the land.